It is 4 in the morning on a mountain highway and the road is closed. Not because an avalanche has come down, because one is about to, and the people who closed the road are the ones who are going to start it. Somewhere up on that ridge is a steel tube pointed at the snow, and in a few minutes it is going to fire. I'm Alex, and this is Unseen Systems. Let's work out why deliberately burying your own highway is the safest thing anyone up there can do. In Colorado alone, there are 522 known avalanche paths hanging above state highways, and the Transport Department actively controls 278 of them. In one winter, crews there set off 1,615 explosions and deliberately triggered 877 avalanches. That is not damage control after a storm, that is the maintenance schedule. Start with what is actually up there. An avalanche of this kind is not loose snow sliding off a roof. It is a slab, a bonded plate of snow, sometimes a meter thick, sitting on something weaker. And that weaker thing is a real, identifiable layer, buried and out of sight. Snow types differ from one mountain range to the next. What is stacked on what does not. Here is how the weak layer gets there. Shallow snow, cold ground, clear skies for a few nights, and the crystals rebuild themselves into large, angular, sugary grains that barely touch each other. Snow scientists call it depth hoar. It has almost no strength in shear. Then it snows again, the new snow bonds into a slab, and now you have a heavy, cohesive plate resting on a layer of loose sugar, and it can sit there like that for days, weeks, or months. So how does it let go? Not all at once, and not from the top. The bond between the slab and that weak layer breaks at one point, and then the crack runs. It propagates sideways along the weak layer, out across the slope, faster than you can react to it. Only once the fracture has spread far enough does the slab above lose its footing and go, which tells you something important about what a control crew actually needs to accomplish. They do not need to move the slope. They need to break one small piece of one buried layer. Which is where the tube comes in. The classic fixed installation is a curved steel exploder bolted permanently into the starting zone, fed by gas lines from a shelter up on the ridge. On command, valves release oxygen and propane into the tube. The mixture is ignited, and the blast leaves the open mouth aimed straight down at the snow. Chamber sizes run from under cubic meter to 3 cubic meters, and the whole cycle, prime, fire, takes under 2 minutes. Nobody walks into the start zone. Nobody handles an explosive. The trigger arrives by radio. There are other versions towers that drop a solid charge from a rack, smaller gas units for tight little trigger points, and researchers have measured all of them side by side, with pressure sensors set 15 centimeters above the snow surface. 2 findings matter. First, gas and solid explosive are close to equivalent for the same energy. Second, and this is the one that reframes everything, the pressure falls away with distance extraordinarily fast. How much pressure do you even need? The figure researchers work with is 1 kilopascal, and the way it gets described is careful.
That pressure value has been proposed by some researchers as the minimum pressure needed to collapse a weak layer, initiate fracture, and induce an avalanche.
1 kilopascal, and even that modest number, the same researcher notes, is not something everyone agrees on. Terrain moves it around too. A charge fired into a gully channels its energy downhill and roughly doubles the rate at which pressure rises compared to the same charge on flat ground. So the crew is not choosing a spot on a map. They are choosing a spot that will actually couple into the snow. And now put the 2 numbers next to each other. The charge delivers something on the order of 1 kilopascal onto the snow near it. The avalanche it releases can hit a building at 30 kilopascals, the pressure that flattens a timber-framed house across the whole face of it from a slope that was standing there quietly a second earlier. That energy did not come from the explosion. It was already stored in the snow, held up by a layer of sugar crystals. The Swiss Institute for Snow and Avalanche Research put 2 triggering methods side by side in a field study and reported plainly how little reach either of them has.
At large distances, say 100 m, the impact is small with both methods, and the additional load caused on the snowpack seems insufficient in most cases to trigger an avalanche.
So the explosive is not a weapon against the mountain. It is an ignition source, and everything after the first crack is the slope spending what it had already saved up, which is exactly why the timing is the whole point. Wait, and the slab keeps thickening, and the one avalanche you eventually get is the big one at an hour nobody chose. Fire now and you get a small one onto an empty road, and the closure lasts only as long as the operation. And if the shot produces nothing at all, that is not a wasted trip either. The snowpack has just been tested, and a natural release has become unlikely. The same logic gets written into the map. In Switzerland, the hazard zones are defined by a pressure and a return period. If a 300-year avalanche would hit harder than 30 kilopascals, that ground is red, and red is not a warning, it is a prohibition. The Institute's own wording leaves no room in it.
No building zones may be designated in the red zone. The red zone is essentially a prohibited area.
But a hazard map is a statement about the past. It is drawn from a record of what this valley has done before. On the 23rd of February 1999, that record ran out. In the Austrian village of Galtur, an avalanche came down onto the district of Winkel. Austria's zoning used a different color scheme than the Swiss one, and Winkel was green, safe, built without reinforcement, because nothing in the local history said otherwise. It released high on the slope above the village, from about 2,700 meters, off ground in the usual slab avalanche band, the mid-30s to 40 degrees, and it came down as a powder avalanche, the fast kind that travels as much on air as on snow. Of the 57 people buried, 26 were pulled out alive, 31 were not, and the valley was not finished. The next day, a second avalanche hit Galtur further down the same road and killed 7 more. And this was not one freak slope. That winter, 5 to 8 meters of fresh snow fell on the northern Alps inside 4 weeks. Around 1,200 destructive avalanches ran in Switzerland alone, causing something like 600 million francs of damage and 17 deaths there. The mountains were doing this everywhere at once, and the maps were being tested everywhere at once. What followed was not only concrete. Steel fences went up across the slopes above, and a wall was built above the village to turn the flow away from it. The old green zone was reclassified, and the research institute that reviewed that winter reached a conclusion that points straight back at the tube on the ridge. Blasting avalanches, they found, is a viable and cost-effective alternative to building barriers. It is worth saying that the control work carries its own risk. In 2014, a mitigation round detonated inside the barrel of a launcher in Colorado and injured 2 avalanche specialists, which is a large part of why so much of this moved to remote-fired installations in the first place. Follow that one step further and the whole practice turns inside out. The interesting thing about avalanche control is not that it protects a road from avalanches. It is that it does not prevent a single one, it moves them out of the hours when the road is full and into the hours when it is empty, because nobody up there has ever had the option of a slope that does not slide. The snow is going to spend that energy. The only thing on the table, the only thing a crew at 4 in the morning is actually deciding, is the date. So the closure sign is not really telling you that the mountain is dangerous today. It is telling you that somebody has looked at a buried layer of sugar crystals, decided it will fail this week one way or the other, and picked the hour. Pull up at a winter closure sometime and look at the walls of avalanche debris shoved to the roadside. Every one of those was scheduled. Thanks for watching.